quality-wise, I mean, I have to admit that it's not quite up to the standard.
Bruce Lee died tragically at the age of 32. The official cause of death, a fatal reaction to aspirin.
Bruce Lee is undoubtedly the legendary champion of martial fights. He played a fundamental role in shaping the game into what we know as today. But what many people don't know is how long it took him to get that good. He wasn't born a fighter. In fact, Bruce Lee didn't look like a fighter. As a child, he was thin and sickly. He would get into street fights and lose. But all of these were nothing compared to his first professional fights. Do you want to know how they turned out? Join us as we dive into the details. Stories about Bruce Lee's fighting career. Bruce Lee didn't always have it easy.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, see, to me, a motion picture is motion. Yeah.
In fact, looking back at his childhood, the last thing anyone would expect him to become was a fighter. Some people who knew him then described him as very smallish in size. He would usually run away from other kids to avoid quarrels. And when he grew to his teens and picked fights with some of his mates, he rarely won. He would return home beaten. Teachers saw him as unfocused. He has so many visits to the hospital that doctors warned his parents he might not survive adulthood if he didn't slow down. Nothing about the young Bruce Lee suggested the man he would become. Fast forward just a few years. Bruce Lee is standing at the center of a global movement. Hollywood cameras follow him. Martial artists study him. Fighters fear him. Philosophers quote him. His speed defies explanation. His ideas challenge centuries of tradition. And his name alone is enough to stop conversations mid-sentence. But he came a long way before he got to that point in his career. In fact, we are going to reveal some events that changed the whole story of his life. No one could have imagined it. The first private detail of his life that many people don't know is how many losses he had to endure at first. Very few legendary fighters suffered as many losses as Bruce Lee did. Before he became untouchable, he was anything but. As a teenager growing up in Hong Kong,
he's just achieved superstardom as a film actor here in Hong Kong, so what does he choose? The East or the West?
Bruce Lee was constantly getting into street fights. True, he won some, but more often than not, he didn't. He was small-statured, emotional, reckless, and angry. He relied on instinct more than discipline. His opponents, who were usually bigger in size, played on these factors. They were experienced and less impulsive than he was at the time. Despite the fact that Bruce was fast, there was only so much he could achieve with his speed. One loss in particular changed everything. It happened in 1958. Bruce Lee had entered the Hong Kong Inter-School Boxing Championship, and he made it to the final round. He was confident and aggressive. He had no doubt in his mind that he would win, but in a shocking twist of events, he was outworked, outlasted, and beaten. For someone he had believed he was now making remarkable advancements, that loss really stung and cut deep. Around the same time, Bruce Lee was challenged repeatedly in unsanctioned fights. Some would be on rooftops, alleys, empty lots. Times, he would be thoroughly defeated that he had retreats. Other times, he would be so overwhelmed. These unsanctioned fights were illegal, but at that time, this was where word of a fighter's skills would be spread. So many legendary fighters participated in these fights. Word soon began spreading that Bruce Lee talked a lot, but wasn't yet the fighter he claimed to be. That kind of talk could be very damaging to a fighter, especially an upcoming one like Bruce Lee. But it got worse. Something happened that even his family had to step in. Bruce Lee had lost another street fight, but this wasn't like any of the others. It was so bad that local authorities had to get involved. His parents were warned that if Bruce stayed in Hong Kong, he would end up in prison or worse, dead. That was when they had to make a tough decision. At 18 years old, he was sent away to America, not as a rising martial artist, but as a problem that needed to be removed. When Bruce arrived in the United States, the losses didn't stop. They simply changed form. He decided to set up a martial arts school, but he didn't follow the traditional ways of the American martial masters. His methods were different, and he taught without credentials. Traditional masters criticized him. Even the Chinese martial arts communities rejected him for teaching non-Chinese students. Fighters challenged him to prove himself. He took on many of these challenges. Some of them exposed his weaknesses, like poor endurance, overcommitment, and lack of efficiency. In no time, Bruce Lee realized something most fighters never accept: that raw talent wasn't enough and speed wasn't the only requirement. If he continued fighting the way he always had, he would always hit a ceiling. That realization became his turning point. Bruce Lee began tearing his own martial arts apart. He analyzed every loss, every weakness, every moment where instinct failed him. He rebuilt himself from the ground up, physically, mentally, philosophically. He trained longer than anyone else. And then something changed. The losses stopped, not because Bruce avoided fights, but because he no longer fought the same way. His movements became efficient and his strikes economical. The man who once relied on emotion now relied on precision. From that point forward, Bruce Lee wasn't just difficult to beat. He was nearly impossible to touch. Just a few years later, another major event occurred in Bruce Lee's life. It was in 1967 at Madison Square Garden. The All-American Karate Championships had drawn the best fighters in the country. And then, Bruce Lee stepped onto the floor, not to compete, but to demonstrate. What followed wasn't a fight. It was a revelation. Bruce Lee moved faster than most people could process. Strikes landed before the audience realized he had thrown them. Even seasoned martial artists stood still, trying to understand what they had just seen. After the event, long after most people had gone home, Bruce Lee found himself deep in conversation with one of the night's champions. What started as casual talk turned into something else entirely. They spoke about fighting philosophy, about efficiency and limits. And by the end of it, Bruce Lee had found something rare. Someone who challenged him without trying to diminish him. This person was Chuck Norris. That conversation marked the beginning of 2 intense years of private training. Both men would meet in a quiet backyard in Culver City and train relentlessly. They would have sessions that lasted hours and do pull-ups until it was physically impossible. They had sparring rounds without rest and conditioning drills designed to break endurance. The two men had different ideas on martial arts, and so they tested each other's belief and questioned every assumption. Bruce Lee wasn't interested in being comfortable. He was interested in being correct. What made these sessions different wasn't competition. It was mutual respect. Bruce Lee didn't see training partners as followers. He saw them as mirrors. They helped him expose flaws he couldn't see alone. He pushed his body harder than anyone else in the yard, often to the concern of those watching. Rest was optional. Intensity was not. During one session, a disagreement surfaced that would quietly reshape martial arts history. He couldn't have imagined how the session would change the rest of his martial arts journey. Bruce Lee rarely kicked above the waist. His methods were simpler. High kicks were too risky and exposed too much. They were easy to counter too. He believed efficiency meant minimizing unnecessary movement, but that belief was challenged. Chuck Norris's approach was more technical. If an opponent leaves their head exposed, why ignore it? Why limit weapons that could end a fight instantly? Bruce Lee listened. And then he did what separated him from everyone else. He adapted. Within months, Bruce Lee's training changed. He began doing more high kicks in his routines. His spinning techniques were more refined, and his jump kicks were sharpened. His on-screen fighting style evolved. The kicks that would later become iconic weren't accidents. They were deliberate additions born from those 2 years of intense training with Chuck Norris. Those who witnessed these sessions later confirmed it. Bruce Lee was constantly rebuilding himself, and when he stepped onto a film set a few years later to face that same training partner on screen, the world would finally see the result, not knowing it had been forged quietly, years earlier, in a backyard. No one was watching.
Well, not really, you see, because most of the Mandarin picture done here are dubbed anyway.
They dubbed anyway.
Anyway.
He was just a martial arts teacher at this point in his life. Then he got a new student. His name was Steve McQueen. By the late 1960s, Steve McQueen was the biggest movie star in the world. He is featured in movies like Bullet, The Great Escape, and The Thomas Crown Affair. Despite his experience, he was genuinely interested in learning martial arts. He didn't train with Bruce Lee for publicity. He trained because Bruce Lee was real, precise, and ruthless in his efficiency. McQueen respected that immediately. Very quickly, their relationship grew beyond teacher and student. McQueen saw something in Bruce Lee that Hollywood hadn't yet figured out: presence. After one class, McQueen said something that Bruce Lee wasn't prepared to hear. He suggested Bruce Lee go into movies. At first, Bruce Lee laughed it off. He had already tasted rejection before. Hollywood had typecast him. Studios told him he wasn't the right kind of Asian. He was too Chinese and intense, they said. However, McQueen didn't back down. He told Bruce Lee what few people had told him honestly: "You don't need permission to belong on screen. You already command attention. The camera will find you if you let it." But Bruce Lee still hesitated. He had never been interested in fame for its own sake. He cared about impact, about changing how martial arts were understood. Still, McQueen pushed, believing it would do him a lot of good. He would help Bruce Lee get meetings and help him practice for his screen tests. He was so committed to getting Bruce Lee into theater. Whenever he got rejected, It would remind him that rejection wasn't failure, just feedback. With this enthusiasm, Bruce Lee finally yielded. He committed to taking acting classes, studied movement for the camera, learned restraint instead of explosion. Back then, people's reactions were mixed. Critics didn't know what to do with him. Audiences, however, reacted instantly. They felt him. Steve McQueen gave Bruce Lee one piece of advice that stayed with him for life. Don't chase critics, chase connection instead. If the audience understands you, everything else follows. McQueen would later be one of the pallbearers at Bruce Lee's funeral in 1973, standing beside others whose lives Bruce had touched deeply. He never lived to see how massive Bruce Lee's impact would become. But without that push, Bruce Lee might have remained a brilliant teacher hidden from the world. Instead, he stepped in front of the camera, and martial arts cinema was never the same again. Events in Bruce Lee's personal life. Changes in Bruce Lee's life didn't just come from his career.
I have to find like something similar to that and keep a kind of a feeling going behind that. Something that...
Some came from those he considered his family. One major event that shaped his life was a deeply personal loss. This fateful day, Bruce Lee was deep into training and teaching when the news reached him. Ip Man was gone. He was his teacher and mentor, the man who had taken him in when Bruce Lee was reckless, undisciplined, and searching for direction. Ip Man died in 1972, after a long battle with illness. For Bruce Lee, the loss hit harder than most people realized. Ip Man wasn't just a martial arts instructor. He was the first adult who believed Bruce Lee's intensity could be shaped rather than suppressed. When Bruce was expelled from schools, when street fights defined his reputation, when others saw trouble, Ip Man saw potential, and now he was gone. Bruce Lee reportedly shut down for days. He couldn't train or even have meaningful conversations with people. His friends noticed the change immediately. For a man who built his identity on constant motion, grief brought stillness. To understand the impact, you have to understand who Ip Man was to Bruce Lee. Ip Man was a Wing Chun master. Yes, and more importantly, he was a disciplined incarnate. He taught Bruce Lee structure when he wanted freedom, restraint when wanted explosion. Their relationship wasn't perfect. Bruce Lee challenged him constantly and questioned his methods, but that tension forged Bruce Lee's foundation. Ip Man had also warned Bruce Lee repeatedly about excess, about pushing the body too far, too fast. He believed balance mattered more than intensity. Bruce listened, but not always. By the early 1970s, Bruce Lee was operating at a level few humans ever had. He was training obsessively and filming endlessly. He would sometimes experiment with new methods, burning through energy, without pause. Those close to him worried.